Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you as we talk about what's happening in the Middle East. There's a lot going on in the Middle East. And as we look at what's happening with Luigi Mangione, who is the accused killer, the accused shooter in the killing of the CEO of United Healthcare, of the United Health Insurance Company, Brian Thompson. Well, we're watching that. And we saw an outburst in court from him today. I think we're going to find out a lot more about this young man and his motivations, the specifics, his critiques of healthcare in America. I think that's at the crux of where he is. We've been also talking about Sonia Massey, the young woman who said to the police officer several times, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." She had called the police because there was a prowler outside of her home. And, well, they went into her home and then they killed her. Even though his partner kept trying to pull him back, like, wait a minute, she doesn't mean any harm. Well, there's that. And then, of course, Daniel Penny was exonerated in the choking death of Jordan Neely in New York. Huh. It just doesn't stop. In the meantime, Benjamin Netanyahu he's been involved not just in international crises, but he has a domestic crisis. He is on trial for corruption, and he actually went into the docket yesterday. Yeah. And no one really caught that. But his domestic problems have domestic and international implications. As the ICC indicted him, and there are places in the world, many, if not most places in the world, that actually could arrest him should he come there. Now, mind you, the United States won't arrest him. France, who are signatories to the ICC, said that they won't arrest him. But let's talk with Dr. John quickly about this, because indeed, this is he's certainly one of the foremost experts on Palestine. And, we just have to thank him for always reaching back whenever we reach out. He's a professor emeritus of international law at Ohio State University. And indeed, his books include something that I just got, The Statehood of Palestine. It took me a minute to get it. I was like, what is going on? I had to go to several places to get it, but I did get it. The Statehood of Palestine, international law in the Middle East conflict, even though we now have the nominee to become the ambassador to Israel. He said there's no such thing as a Palestinian. What do you think of that, Mike Huckabee, saying that, Professor Quigley?
Yeah, can you remind me what exactly?
Mike Huckabee said there's no such thing as a Palestinian.
Yes.
Palestine. What?
Yeah,
How? When you talk about but you said and even Golda Meir said in an interview more than 50 years ago, she said that she was Palestinian. She talked about Palestine. What the statehood of Palestine? Is Palestine a state?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a country?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's both. And Mr. Huckabee should do a little background reading before he talks. It is certainly a country. It is a state as of the year 1924. It has been a state since that time, ever since the breakup of the Ottoman Empire at the end of the First World War. So there was a peace treaty at that time ending the war. And when Turkey renounced its sovereignty, it said that the states that were being formed out of its territory would be the successors to Turkey. And that's never changed, even though the Zionist movement has come in and taken over a portion of the territory of Palestine. uh, that doesn't negate the existence of the state of Palestine, and it is recognized by over 100 countries of the world, which is an indication of its status in the world, because you become a state by being accepted in the international community.
So, where are we now? I mean, it seems that every time I speak with you, things get worse and worse and worse there. These now we're full on um, in Lebanon. It seems that this, instead of getting better, everything is getting, it's the war is expanding, and now we the Americans officially have boots on the ground officially.
Mhm.
What is going on?
Well, I think Israel has taken upon itself to spread the war around a bit. And the Biden administration just cheers Israel on as Israel does it. I mean, it has cheered Israel on for going into Lebanon and for destroying a good part of the city of Beirut, and killing several thousand people there. Um, and now, as of the last 24 hours, it's attacking into Syria. It has more or less destroyed the navy of Syria within the last 24 hours. I haven't heard any criticism from the Biden administration on that. Um, but I think Israel is taking advantage of the fact that it knows it can get away with doing whatever it wants to do now in Syria. Um, so that's what it is doing. Um, uh, but I think it's unfortunate that the Biden administration hasn't made any effort to put the curbs on Israel.
What will happen with Syria? What is that about now?
Well, I don't know exactly what kind of government is going to emerge in Syria. Um, uh, I think what it should be doing is going to the UN and charging aggression against Israel. That's what the UN is supposed to be for. When you have a country that attacks another country without cause, the UN is supposed to do something. Uh, the problem is that everybody now knows that the United Nations won't do anything, precisely because of the posture of the U.S. government in support of Israel. Um, but as far as what's likely to happen in Syria, that remains to be seen. This force that has come in is an Islamist force. It has connections with Al Qaeda at one point. It has changed its posture quite substantially. It's not clear exactly what it will do. It says it will be uh, uh, friendly to all of the ethnic groups in Syria, and that is a big issue in Syria. The government that was overthrown was largely a government that was promoted by a minority group, a rather strange situation actually in Syria, that you had a minority ethnic group that was in charge of the country. It's a group called Alawite,
Yeah.
Alawite. Uh, and the father of Bashar al Assad, who was just overthrown, made good coalition arrangements with the Arabs, who are the Sunni Arabs, who are
Mhm.
the predominant group in Syria, and was able to run the country with that kind of a coalition. Now we see Alawites who are fleeing from Syria because they are afraid of what the new government will do. They're afraid of reprisals. So that's something that's very worrying, that Alawites don't feel safe. Hopefully, the new group will make it sufficiently clear that there is not going to be any kind of reprisal, and that those people will feel comfortable to come back into Syria. But the Israeli government is angering the entire population of the country, regardless of ethnicity now, by what it is doing, by going in and destroying the Navy. So if Israel thought it was going to have a friendly group now in Syria, I think it has shot itself in the foot because everyone in Syria is angry, whether they're, Alawite, Sunni, Shia, whether they're, pro-West, anti-West. They are all seeing that Israel is not their friend.
When you look at this, well, the ousting of the Assad government, it was done very peacefully. I mean, it's like he just walked away, he asked for peace, and now he's in Russia. How are we to interpret that?
Well, the group against which he had been fighting, and which was holding a province, the Idlib province in the north, they were going after him militarily. So he didn't just pick up and decide to leave. 2 or 3 days ago, the army of Syria let him know that it was not going to preserve his government. So he had, I think, very little choice in the matter.
Well, he's now in Russia. What's our takeaway with that?
Correct. Right. He had been supported by the government of Russia, and so he has a friendly relationship there, and they have agreed to take him in. Russia has a military base on the Mediterranean coast. It remains to be seen how that is going to play out. Because I don't think the new people coming in are particularly friendly with Russia. It may be that Russia will pull out of that base in time, but it was that relationship with Russia that led to Russia offering him the opportunity to move there.
Well, so is this new government friendly to Israel and the United States, or are they neutral? I mean, seems like no one in that is neutral. But I mean, whose side are they on?
I don't think they're on anybody's side at this point. I think they're not very likely to become a close ally of the United States, largely because of the fact that Israel is doing what it's doing against them, and they see Israel and the United States as being, two peas in a pod. So I would imagine they will keep a distance from the United States.
So, what now for the United States? I mean, are we? Tucker Carlson is over in Russia. He said, "Look, we're already in a hot war with Russia." And it seems like Russia and the United States are in this Middle East conflict in, to varying degrees. It's almost as if we're confronting one another by proxy. I mean, is that an accurate reading? I'm trying to find out who's who, what's what, because because the countries are coming in. It seems like every week there's a new country that's been added to this conflict, and I'm like, what's going on here? And we got Ukraine still.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that a Russia-U.S. Um, controversy is really the fundamental factor in the Middle East. I mean,
Okay.
I think it's what's going on as between the Arab world and Israel. The government of Russia has come in strongly on the side of the government of Syria that is now overthrown. Um, and I suspect it's going to back off because the new government is not likely to want to have that kind of a relationship with Russia.
Mhm.
Um, uh, but uh, I, I think that the fundamental dynamic will still be based on the people in that region.
We're talking with Professor John Quigley, Professor Emeritus of International Law at Ohio State University, and we're trying to get a wrap our arms around what is happening in the Middle East. We're moving toward the end of the year. It seems that well, it seems like this what was October 7th has just grown and grown and grown. It is mushroomed. I mean, no pun intended when it comes to the discussion about nuclear war. But help me to understand. I mean, some people are saying that we're closer to nuclear war than we have been in a long time. What do you think? Do you think that there's potential for a nuclear conflict, or certainly a nuclear weapon to be deployed in the Middle East?
That doesn't seem to be on the horizon yet. Um, it's more likely from the Ukraine situation, but uh, the I mean, the Middle East needs to be brought to a posture where self-determination is being respected, and the Palestinians are able to have effective control of uh, their own destiny. Um, uh, and I think that's what the international community needs to work toward. Um, I mean, we still have the Israeli army killing, 10, 20 Palestinians every day. And there's so much else going on in the world that it doesn't get much attention. Um, but that is what needs to be stopped.
What do you think is going to, where are we? I mean, as we're transitioning from the Biden administration into the Trump administration, it seems that what do you expect the Trump administration to do? What are they signaling that they are going to do about Gaza, about the West Bank? I mean, will they bring peace, or will they aggravate the situation, Professor Quigley?
Well, Mr. Trump has said that he wants to see a quick end to things, um, which in the short term is potentially a favorable development. If by that he means that the Israeli army should stop its policy of continuing to attack large numbers of Palestinians in Gaza. Um, uh, but one doesn't know exactly what Mr. Trump will actually do. Um, uh, he has said that this should all end before 20 of January. It's probably not going to end by 20 of January. And then we'll have to see uh, how he shifts and what kind of pressure, if any, he brings on the government of Israel in that regard.
How do you think, what will be the legacy of President Biden in Israel, in Gaza, in the West Bank?
Well, he's promoted the genocide of the people of Palestine. I think that's the way he is widely regarded presently, and that I think will be his legacy. That even as things have gotten worse and worse, he has continued to arm Israel, despite his efforts at telling them to be a bit nicer. The way they're killing Palestinians, everyone sees that hasn't had much of an impact. So he is, I think, being regarded as an enabler of the erasure of the people of Palestine.
How will that, so what does President Trump do with that? I mean, because it seems that instead of de escalating, the Biden administration is escalating on its way out. I mean, well, what is President Trump supposed to do with that? What do you think he will do with that?
Yeah, I don't know how he's going to to react, because in the past he seems to do whatever some of his pro-Israel backers want him to do. It may depend to some extent on what they tell him they want, as a implied condition for continued financial contributions to him. Of course, he can't run for office again, so that dynamic may not play out the way it has in the past. Maybe he won't be listening to those people so much. But the concern is that those people would be telling him to support the extreme right wing in Israel, which would like to annex Gaza and the West Bank.
So if they annex Gaza and the West Bank, the Palestinians clearly have to go. Is that it?
Well, they would probably continue to put pressure on the Palestinians to go, killing substantial numbers in Gaza, making it difficult for them to survive there, so that more people will leave, quote unquote, voluntarily, uh, because they simply can't make a go of life when they're living in towns that are just full of broken concrete from the buildings that have been bombed.
Professor Quigley, I mean, what is the answer? The ICC has weighed in, um, and yet France has said that they will not arrest Benjamin Netanyahu, and the United States, Mr. Gallant was shouted into a building in Washington, D.C. last night, but America's not going to do anything. What did the ICC ruling do? I know that it was momentous. I know that, but what does it do if you have the United States, which is the United States isolated by our stance?
I think so, especially now that we veto anything that the Security Council wants to do. Um, uh, we are viewed as being isolated together with Israel in the in the world community.
So what is the impact upon us, on the United States? That isolation, what does that do to us?
Well, it means that we're regarded in a negative light in most countries of the world. It doesn't help the United States at all for any of the objectives that the United States might have, whether that's to, you know, uh, have a confrontation with China or anything else. Um, uh, but I don't think that the Biden administration uh, has really taken that into account. I mean, it wants to be the leading power in the world. It wants to win the hearts and minds of people over and against China. But at the same time, it wants to do whatever Israel asks it to do. And those are just two fundamentally conflicting objectives.
Well, where do you how can this conflict be resolved? Is there anything that you believe the United States will do differently?
Well, perhaps under Mr. Trump, it will simply try not to be involved. Um, uh, that's a conceivable outcome that could be beneficial. Um, um, but it's hard to imagine that Mr. Trump is going to cut off Israel's money. Um, I'm not optimistic that whatever he says about non-involvement, that he will really be non-involved. Um, he's likely to continue to promote the several $billion a year that we have been giving Israel for a long time. The MAGA people in Congress are oriented that way. They say that they don't want to be involved internationally, except when you begin talking about Israel, they do a 180-degree flip, and of course they say that they want to do whatever Israel thinks it needs and is in Israel's interest.
Moving forward, I mean, because the past, I guess since 2023, it seems like this problem it has grown and grown and grown and grown. Uh, what do you want? What do you think that we should focus on, particularly as Americans, as members of the global community? What do you think our focus should be with respect to this particular crisis in the Middle East going forward as we go into 2025 into a new presidency? Many people are despairing of the fact that, oh my goodness, all is lost. And I'm saying, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. No matter what, it seems like both parties were going to end up where we are. And most Americans don't want to be here. And those numbers continue to grow. What can we do to move the needle?
Well, I think we can take action with regard to the Congress and try to indicate that we don't think that the unquestioning support of Israel is a good thing. You did have Bernie Sanders proposing to cut off the military assistance, and he got some help from members of Congress that I would not have expected would support him on that. He didn't get a majority, but he got more support in the Senate than I would have imagined. I was a bit surprised. So I think that's one line of activity. I think we can also, to the extent we can, help other countries in the world and encourage them to take up the slack. I mean, I would like to see a United Nations peacekeeping force go into Gaza and protect the people of Palestine, and perhaps oversee a withdrawal of the Israeli forces. We had something like that back in 1956 when Israel invaded Gaza, and when it was forced out by, guess who? President Eisenhower. President Eisenhower threatened to cut off their money if they didn't pull out of Gaza. Golda Meir was the prime minister, and she pulled out. Um, uh, so.
But what had happened? There was a time when American presidents could say something, and Israel, I mean, even with Reagan. But what's happened?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have a good answer. There was a huge shift with the Johnson administration. The shift, I think, came Kennedy to Johnson. I think President Kennedy was more cautious on Israel and didn't see support of Israel as the most important thing. But Johnson did. And so when in 1967 Israel invaded Gaza, and that's why it has it right now, because it invaded in 1967. When that happened, the United States covered for Israel at the United Nations. When Israel claimed it had been attacked by Egypt, the United States didn't tell the United Nations that it was a lie, and the United States knew 100% that it was a lie, because the Israeli government, for the last couple of weeks prior to invading Gaza, had been asking the United States for permission to do so. And the Johnson administration had been saying no, because the Johnson administration was afraid it would lead to a world war with Russia. But once the Israeli government invaded and Russia didn't get involved, the Johnson administration decided to support Israel. So it didn't do anything like what President Eisenhower had done a decade earlier to reverse the taking of Gaza.
Just that is, I mean, what pushed Johnson in another direction?
You know, that's something I really don't have a good answer for. I mean, there was a lot of lobbying in Congress that's part of it, but it wasn't at the level that it became a decade or so later.
I mean, because if I may, Professor, quickly, I mean, more and more historians are beginning to write about the conflicts that John Kennedy had with Israel at that time. What was the conflict, or what were the conflicts?
Well, he was concerned about Israel's nuclear weaponry that it was developing and concealing from public knowledge. He thought that was a potential for getting the world into a world war. So I think that was his main concern about Israel.
And so what happened? Did that just go away once he was killed?
Well, that's where I'm not sure, because there clearly was a different attitude that Lyndon Johnson brought to bear in the the situation. Um, uh, uh, and I think it probably related to domestic politics in the United States that he was more of a political animal than John Kennedy had been. Um, uh, so when he saw that it was helpful to the Democrat Party to be more supportive of Israel, I think he was inclined to give into that, whereas Kennedy had not been.
Professor, quickly, where do we go from here? I mean, do you see a ceasefire in 2025? And ceasefire, but who would be left? I mean, the Lancet study several months ago said that about 200,000 had been killed, and they estimate that up to 500,000 Palestinians will be killed. That's a fifth of their population. I mean, how can this continue?
Yeah, it is hard to fathom how it has been let to go in this direction. Um, and, you know, we see these institutions like the International Court of Justice and, as you mentioned, the International Criminal Court um, uh, taking action and saying, you know, these things should not be happening. The International Criminal Court is saying that Israel is carrying out a policy of starvation of the people of Gaza. Um, uh, but that is supposed to be dealt with then by the UN, by the Security Council, by the General Assembly. And even the General Assembly has been very weak. They have now called for a conference to be held in June of next year. Um, if that isn't the most incredible, I mean, they should be calling for a conference, but it should be tomorrow. It shouldn't be in June of next year, by which time who knows what will be left of the people in Gaza.
This is it's just stunning. I mean, are there? I mean, your field of expertise is international law. Will will the world community continue to tolerate this violation of international law? And I mean, is America violating international law?
Well, clearly, America is violating. I mean, the International Court of Justice has said that Israel needs to get out of Gaza, like full stop. Not only that it's committing genocide and war crimes there, um, uh, but that it needs to get out, and that any country that helps Israel maintain its hold on the West Bank and on Gaza is acting unlawfully. So the United States has been put in the posture by the International Court of Justice of being a lawbreaker for helping to maintain an illegal situation in Gaza and in the West Bank. So that's part of why we are at this point so isolated. But no one in the U.S. government seems to be concerned about that. I think Mr. Trump takes what is sometimes called a transactional approach to things,
Yeah.
rather than any approach based on principle. Um, uh, so I don't think he is going to pay any more attention to the International Criminal Court or to the International Court of Justice than the Biden administration has done. That's why it's my hope that other countries will take up the slack. I'm very pessimistic about the United States doing anything constructive.
Will anyone will anyone arrest Netanyahu, or will he just be free? Or because it seems like his troubles at home, well, there are a lot. I mean, it's hard to fathom, but he had to testify uh, in his own corruption trial. What I mean, if no one's going to arrest him, if European countries, I mean, if no one's going to arrest him, what are we doing? I think it's important that South Africa pressed the case and moved forward. But I mean, but now, like, what next? I mean, if people continue to just ignore um, the ICC indictment, what does that say, Professor Quigley?
Well, I mean, even if he were arrested, I'm not sure it would change anything. There would be somebody else who would become prime minister who would do the same thing. Um,
Okay, wait, stop. Because people don't want to hear that. But I have wondered if anyone on the horizon on their political landscape would be fundamentally different. I mean, because I think that we're doing with him what many people have done with President-elect Trump. They don't like his personality. They feel he's, bellicose, belligerent, yada, 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 all the things that people don't like up close and personal. But when you listen to many other leaders, particularly those on the far right, I wonder if they would even be worse.
right. The forces that it seems would probably come in would be even more to the right than he is. Um, uh, yeah. But as far as him in terms of the arrest warrant, I mean, he's going to be careful not to go anywhere where he's going to get arrested. So the odds on him being arrested uh, and taken to the Hague are very low.
What do you think that the average American does not know about this conflict?
Well, I think they don't realize that the conflict involves the bringing into Palestine of a population of people from Europe um, who had the aim of taking over the country, and that the British government allowed them to do that. Um, uh, so you had a population that really was deprived of its own country. I mean, there were Palestinians who were uh, moving out of Palestine as early as the 1920s because they saw the handwriting on the wall. They saw that Britain was bringing in a group that was going to become strong enough that it would have money from outside, that it would be able to take over the country. There is a rather sizable population of Palestinians in South America. This
Yeah.
is something people don't know about very much, particularly in Chile. There were many Palestinians who emigrated out of Palestine in the 1920s and 30s, and moved to Chile. So there's a substantial population of Palestinians there. That's why the government of Chile often does rather progressive things to support the Palestinians at
Uh,
the international level, because they have that constituency as a factor in the politics of Chile. But it was at that time that the country began to be taken over. And I think you were asking what people don't understand. And
we
I
certainly
think
don't
that,
understand that.
yeah, I think that's what is not widely understood. Uh, I think there's a tendency just to see, oh, the Jews are there, the Arabs are there, they always fight. Um, But that's not the way it has happened. It's essentially an Arab country that was taken over uh, under the auspices of a world power, namely Britain, and and that process of taking over the country continued after the Second World War when Britain got out of the picture. And the United States has essentially uh, stepped into the role of Britain and is continuing the eradication of the country.
Is Britain, is the United States the enforcer for Britain? I mean, is the United States essentially doing the bidding of Britain in the Middle East?
No, I think the United States began doing it for its own reasons, and not that it was being asked to do this by Britain.
What is Britain's, why was Britain in the, what do they want? What did they want?
Well, they wanted to control the country, and
Is
they
it because
saw.
of the resources? I mean, did they know that there was so much gold up in them their hills? I mean, I mean the oil. I mean, because it's a very rich territory. I mean, because the decision was okay. You're going to split up the Palestinians, right? Put them on the west. Put them in Gaza. Then you find all this oil and gas, and you say, wait a minute, we got to get that land back. It's an oversimplification, but
Yeah, it,
no.
it's not really an oversimplification. I mean, in the
Oh,
1920s, Britain was also taking over Iraq.
oh,
Uh, that's where the oil was. And in order to pipe it out of Iraq, it was helpful to have a port on the Mediterranean, and that was the city of Haifa in
oh.
Palestine. So that was a good part of the British motivation, along with the general colonialist motivation of having a friendly uh, ethnicity or ethnic group in the colony that's going to help you control the rest of the population, just as one found in other British colonies at that point in history.
But given the Saudis' power, why haven't they been able to do anything, or have they not wanted to do anything?
Have, has who not wanted? You mean
The Saudis.
the Saudis? Oh yeah, um, they have not taken the kind of role that they could have taken. I think they're essentially looking to protect their own interest. Um, uh, but I mean that's a potential. I mean, there is huge sentiment on the part of the people in Saudi Arabia in support of the people of Palestine. Um, and every once in a while, that seems to surface. And it has, in fact, uh, within the last few months, the government of Saudi Arabia has not been willing to enter into the kind of friendly arrangement that Mr. Biden is trying to get Saudi Arabia to enter into with Israel, given what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. So at this point, the Saudi government is not playing ball with the United States.
Well, if you can, you give us a forecast of where this is going, as am just I don't know who's where. Just because everyone says, I mean, and it has been proved that President Trump is transactional, the art of the deal. And as you said, wait a minute, he is um someone who you can't predict where he's going to go. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, yeah. That I suppose is the optimistic view of things. That we know that Biden uh, is going to be bad. Mr. Trump could turn on a dime. Um, he could at some point just say this enough is enough. I mean, he has come very close to saying that. Um, um, he so far hasn't done it under circumstances where the Palestinians would have a really good shake. Although, I mean, he did in principle come up with a plan when he was in office before for a Palestine state in the West Bank and Gaza. It wasn't a very good Palestine state. In fact, it was a very bad one. But in any event, I mean, he has shown that he is willing to get into that discussion. And if he could be convinced that a real Palestine state, one that really had Gaza and the West Bank, that was the way to end things. I think it's not inconceivable that he could put the screws to Israel.
How would he be advantaged? Can you project out and tell me what you think is he would because he's not going to do anything, and no one really does where they take the hit. Mm-hmm. How would he be advantaged?
Well, just that he doesn't want to be involved in conflict. He doesn't want pressure on the United States to get involved, and this would be a way of coming to an accommodation that had the potential of maintaining the peace in the long term. I'm not predicting that this will happen, mind you.
Yes, no, I want
to. But you're asking me for possibilities in a situation where I don't really see good possibilities.
Well, I'm just trying to. Because every time I think I never think I have anything figured out there because it's just a lot, and there's so many different. So many people have. Well, because now you have the BRICS nations that are ascendant. There's so much in the world that is changing, and I don't even know if Americans are as aware as we need to be that the world's a very different place. I mean, this is 2024, not 1924, not 1944. And it's no longer a unipolar world anymore. It's no longer America and everybody else. We're having to make a lot of adjustments. And the European world is having to make a lot of adjustments too. And so we'll see. What would the final word for you today, Dr. Quigley, would be what?
Well, yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the BRICS countries. I think that's where there is some reason for hope that if we want to be on good terms with all of those countries, we can't continue our policy towards Israel.
Well, I mean, I think there's nothing else to say. And they are ascendant, everyone. They are ascendant. And more countries are signing on to work with them, to use their currency. And that is a very, very big deal. Indeed, it is always a pleasure to be with you, Professor John Quigley, Professor Emeritus of International Law at Ohio State University. I pray that you have a blessed holy season.
Thank you very much, and to you as well.
Thank you, and to our love to your family from the Santita Jackson Show and the Morning Stars, everybody who's watching. God bless you.